The phone rang at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday, jarring Marcus awake from the deepest sleep he'd managed in weeks. Working double shifts at Henderson's auto repair had left him running on fumes, and he'd finally collapsed into bed just 4 hours earlier. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a downtown area code. Marcus Johnson. The voice was crisp, professional, expensive sounding. "Yeah, that's me," Marcus mumbled, sitting up on the edge of his worn mattress. "Who's this?" "My name is Catherine Brennan, from Brennan, Walsh and Associates. I'm calling regarding a substantial inheritance that's been designated for you and your son, Devon." Marcus blinked hard, certain he was still dreaming. "I'm sorry. What? An inheritance? There's got to be some mistake. Nobody in my family had money to leave anybody. I assure you, Mr. Johnson, there's no mistake. The benefactor specifically requested that you receive this inheritance as recognition for your kindness during a particularly difficult time in her life. When would be convenient for you to come to our offices to discuss the details?" Marcus stood up, pacing the small bedroom of his cramped apartment. "Ma'am, I think you've got the wrong Marcus Johnson. I'm a mechanic from the South Side. I work on cars, not whatever kind of people leave inheritances. Were you perhaps acquainted with a young woman named Lily about 6 months ago? Someone you helped during a winter storm?" The name hit him like a cold wind. Lily, the girl with the sad eyes and designer clothes that didn't match her desperate situation. Marcus had wondered about her countless times since that night. Hoped she was safe. Hoped she'd found her way back to whatever family was missing her. "You know Lily?" he asked, his voice suddenly serious. "Mr. Johnson, I believe we have quite a bit to discuss. Would Thursday at 2 p.m. work for you?" Marcus looked around his apartment, at the stack of unpaid bills on his kitchen counter, at Devon's worn-out sneakers by the front door that he'd been promising to replace for 2 months. "Thursday at 2 p.m., he repeated. "Downtown. I'll text you the address. And Mr. Johnson, you might want to arrange for someone to cover your shift that day. This conversation will likely take some time." 6 months earlier, Marcus had been trudging home through the worst blizzard Chicago had seen in a decade. His ancient Honda had finally given up 3 blocks from his apartment, leaving him to walk through knee-deep snow while the wind cut through his work jacket like it was made of paper. All he could think about was getting home to Devon, making sure his 15-year-old son had eaten something more substantial than the cereal and instant ramen that had become their standard dinner rotation since Marcus had picked up the second job. He almost missed her entirely, huddled against the brick wall of his apartment. Building was a figure so small and still that he initially mistook her for a pile of discarded clothing. It was only when he got closer that he saw the long dark hair spilling out from under a thin hood, the expensive-looking boots that were completely inappropriate for the weather, and the way her whole body was shaking. "Hey," he called out, kneeling down beside her. "Hey, are you okay?" She looked up at him with eyes that seemed too old for her face, brown eyes that held a kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with the cold. She couldn't have been more than 16, but something in her expression reminded Marcus of himself at that age, when the world had already shown him more than any kid should have to see. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her lips were nearly blue, and Marcus could hear her teeth chattering. Marcus glanced at his apartment building, then back at the girl. His practical side, the part of him that had learned to be cautious through years of struggle, told him to call the police. Let them handle it. He had enough problems without taking in stray teenagers, but something about the way she was trying to make herself invisible, the defeated slump of her shoulders, reminded him of every time he'd been dismissed, overlooked, or written off as someone else's problem. "Listen," he said gently, "I live right here. You want to come up, get warm, maybe call someone to come get you?" She stared at him for a long moment, as if kindness was a foreign concept she was trying to translate. "I don't have anyone to call." Marcus extended his hand. "Then come up anyway. Nobody should be sitting in a blizzard at midnight." Inside his small apartment, Marcus watched as Lily took in their modest surroundings. Devin was asleep on the couch, homework scattered across the coffee table, earbuds still in his ears. The place was clean but obviously worn, furnished with second-hand pieces that Marcus had collected over the years. He suddenly felt self-conscious about the peeling paint on the kitchen walls, the way the heater rattled, the stack of bills he'd hastily shoved into a drawer. But Lily didn't seem to notice any of that. She just stood in the middle of the living room, dripping melted snow onto his carpet, looking like she'd never been inside a real home before. "You hungry?" Marcus asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "I've got some soup, sandwiches." "You don't have to," she said quickly. "I can just sit here until the storm passes." Marcus paused, studying her carefully. Everything about her screamed money, from the cut of her clothes to the way she spoke, but everything about her situation screamed trouble. He'd seen enough hard luck in his life to recognize it in someone else, regardless of what they were wearing. "Kid," he said simply, "when's the last time you ate something?" The way her face crumpled told him everything he needed to know. That first night, while Lily sat wrapped in Marcus's only decent blanket eating canned tomato soup, she told him fragments of a story that didn't quite add up. She'd had a fight with her father, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was about college, about expectations, about never being good enough, no matter how hard she tried. She'd stormed out during the blizzard without thinking, walked 4 hours, until she couldn't feel her feet anymore. "He won't even notice I'm gone," she said, staring into her soup bowl. "He's probably relieved." Marcus didn't push for details. He'd been 15 once, felt that same crushing weight of disappointing the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. Instead, he just nodded and made her another sandwich, using the last of the good lunch meat he'd been saving for Devin's school lunches that week. When it came time to figure out sleeping arrangements, Marcus insisted Lily take his bed while he took the couch. She protested, but he waved her off with the kind of gentle authority that came from years of single parenting. "My house, my rules," he said simply. "Besides, Devin will never let me hear the end of it if I don't treat a guest properly." The next morning, Devin woke up to find a stranger sitting at their kitchen table, helping his father make breakfast with ingredients that definitely hadn't been in their refrigerator the night before. Lily had somehow convinced Marcus to let her walk to the corner store, and she'd returned with eggs, real bacon, fresh bread, and orange juice that wasn't from concentrate. "Dad," Devin said carefully, eyeing Lily with the suspicious curiosity of a teenager, "you want to explain why there's a girl in our kitchen making fancy breakfast?" Marcus looked between his son and Lily, realizing he'd never actually gotten her full story. "This is Lily. She needed a place to stay during the storm. Lily, this is Devin, my son." What struck Marcus most over the next 3 days wasn't how seamlessly Lily fit into their routine, but how hungry she seemed for the most ordinary moments of family life. She insisted on doing dishes, not because she felt obligated, but because she'd never actually washed dishes before, and found the simple ritual fascinating. She sat with Devin while he did homework, not helping so much as just watching him work with an expression of wonder, as if the sight of a father checking his son's math problems was the most remarkable thing she'd ever witnessed. On the second evening, Marcus came home from his early shift to find Lily and Devin building an elaborate fort out of couch cushions and bedsheets, both of them laughing at some private joke. The sound stopped him in the doorway. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard Devin laugh like that, unguarded and completely present in the moment. "Dad, look what Lily showed me," Devin called out, gesturing to a complex structure that had somehow transformed their small living room into an adventure. "She knows how to make these crazy knots that hold everything together." "Learned it at camp," Lily said quickly, but something in her expression suggested the story was more complicated than that. That night, after Devin had gone to bed, Marcus found Lily sitting on the floor of the living room, carefully folding the sheets they'd used for the fort. She moved with a precision that seemed automatic, as if she'd been trained to leave no trace of her presence. "You don't have to do that," Marcus said, settling into his old recliner. "Devin can clean up his own messes." "I like doing it," she said, and Marcus could tell she meant it. "In my house, ... She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "We have people who do things like this. I never get to just take care of normal stuff." The comment hung in the air, another piece of a puzzle Marcus was starting to understand. Lily's clothes were expensive. Her mannerisms spoke of private schools and careful training, but she savored every mundane moment in their cramped apartment, like it was a gift. On the third day, Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impossible a week earlier. Devin needed new sneakers for gym class, and Marcus had been saving $20 a week from his grocery budget to buy them. Instead, he took Lily to the thrift store downtown and bought her a warm coat, real winter boots, and a few changes of clothes that would help her blend in if she decided to stay longer. "You don't have to do this," Lily said, clutching a second-hand sweater to her chest like it was made of gold. "I have money. I can pay you back." "Nobody's keeping track," Marcus replied. The same thing he'd told Devin 100 times when his son worried about being a burden. Family takes care of family. The word seemed to hit Lily like a physical force. She went very still, staring at Marcus with those two old eyes. "Family. You've been here 3 days, Marcus said matter-of-factly. "You've done Devin's dishes, helped him with his algebra homework, and taught him some kind of advanced fort-building technique. Far as I'm concerned, that makes you family." That evening, Marcus overheard Lily on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low but intense. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was familiar, the sound of someone trying to negotiate with a person who held all the power. When she hung up, she sat at the kitchen table for a long time, just staring at her hands. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, joining her at the table. "I have to go home tomorrow," she said quietly. "I've been gone too long. People will start asking questions." Marcus nodded, though something in his chest tightened. Over 3 days, Lily had become part of their rhythm, their small family ecosystem. Devin had started including her in his after-school plans, assuming she'd be there to help with homework or watch movies. The apartment felt different with her in it, more complete somehow. "You know you're welcome back any time," Marcus said. "This will always be your home if you need." Lily looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd found her in the snow, she smiled without reservation. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For treating me like I matter." "You do matter," Marcus said simply. "Don't let anybody tell you different." The next morning, as Lily gathered the few belongings she'd arrived with, Marcus watched her carefully fold the new clothes he'd bought her into a bag she tried to hide from him. She was planning to leave them behind, he realized, some misguided attempt not to take advantage of his generosity. "Take the clothes," he said firmly, "and take this." He pressed a $20 bill into her hand, money he'd been saving for Devin's school lunch account, just in case. Lily stared at the money, then at Marcus, her eyes filling with tears she'd been holding back for days. "I don't know how to thank you." "Just be safe," Marcus replied. "And remember what I told you. You matter, Lily. Whatever's going on at home, whatever anybody tells you, you matter." Marcus offered to drive Lily home that final morning, though she initially resisted, insisting she could take the bus. Something in her reluctance made him more determined to see her safely to her destination. After 3 days of watching her navigate their world with wonder and gratitude, he couldn't shake the feeling that returning to her own world wasn't something she was looking forward to. "It's not a big deal," Marcus said, grabbing his keys from the counter. "Devin's got basketball practice after school anyway. I've got time." Lily gave him an address that meant nothing to Marcus, just numbers and a street name on the north side of the city. as they drove through increasingly affluent neighborhoods, past manicured lawns, and houses that could have contained his entire apartment building. Marcus began to understand why Lily had seemed so fascinated by their simple routines. "This is where you live?" he asked, trying to keep the surprise out of his voice as they turned onto a street lined with what could only be described as mansions. "Yeah," Lily said quietly, staring out the passenger window. "It's not as nice as it looks." Marcus had grown up poor enough to know that money didn't guarantee happiness, but the sheer scale of wealth they were driving through was hard to comprehend. These weren't just big houses. They were statements, monuments to success that seemed designed to intimidate anyone who didn't belong. "Turn left here," Lily directed, her voice getting smaller with each block. The house she pointed to at the end of a curved driveway made Marcus's breath catch. It wasn't just large. It was architectural, the kind of place that belonged in magazines, rather than reality. Floor-to-ceiling windows, perfectly symmetrical landscaping, and a circular driveway that could have accommodated a dozen cars. A fountain sat in the center of the drive, still running despite the winter weather. Marcus pulled up to the front entrance, the old Honda looking painfully out of place against the backdrop of marble columns and pristine stonework. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Lily," Marcus said carefully, "are you sure you're going to be okay here?" She turned to look at him, and he saw something in her expression that reminded him of Devon when he was younger, trying to be brave about things that scared him. "I have to be," she said simply. "If you ever need anything," Marcus began, but Lily was already shaking her head. "You've done enough," she said. "More than enough. You gave me something I didn't even know I was missing." She reached over and hugged him then, a fierce, grateful embrace that lasted longer than he'd expected. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Marcus," she whispered, "for everything, for showing me that good people still exist." Marcus watched her walk up the stone steps to the massive front door, her small figure dwarfed by the imposing entrance. She didn't look back, but he waited until she was safely inside before pulling away. The contrast between his world and hers sitting heavy in his chest. It wasn't until he was back home, hanging his jacket in the closet, that he discovered the piece of paper in his pocket, folded small and written in careful handwriting. The note was brief, but somehow contained everything Lily hadn't been able to say out loud. "Thank you for showing me what real family looks like." L.W. Marcus stared at the initials, realizing he'd never actually learned Lily's last name. In 3 days of shared meals and easy conversation, it had never come up. She'd just been Lily, the girl who needed help, the unexpected addition to their small family, who had somehow made everything feel more complete. He tucked the note into his wallet, behind Devon's school picture, and tried to push down the worry that had been growing since he'd seen where she lived. Houses like that came with expectations, pressures, and responsibilities that a 16-year-old shouldn't have to carry. But Lily was smart, resourceful, and stronger than she looked. She'd be fine. The weeks that followed fell back into their familiar rhythm. Marcus worked his double shifts. Devon focused on school and basketball, and gradually their apartment stopped feeling like it was missing something. But occasionally, usually late at night, when the city was quiet, Marcus would find himself wondering about Lily. Was she okay? Had things worked out with her father? Did she ever think about their 3 days together, or had it been just a brief detour in a life that had quickly returned to normal? Devon asked about her a few times in the first couple of weeks, wondering if she might visit or if Marcus had heard from her. But as teenagers do, he eventually got caught up in his own world of friends and school and the daily concerns of 15-year-old life. Winter turned to spring, and spring began its slow transition toward summer. Marcus picked up an extra weekend shift at the shop, saving money for Devon's summer basketball camp. Bills got paid, groceries got bought, and life continued with the steady predictability that Marcus had worked so hard to build for his son. Sometimes, driving through the wealthier parts of the city for work, Marcus would think about that massive house, wonder if Lily was still there, still trying to figure out how to navigate a world that seemed to value appearance over authenticity. But those moments passed quickly, swept away by the immediate demands of his own reality. He never could have imagined that 6 months later, a lawyer's phone call would reveal just how profoundly those 3 days had affected the quiet girl with the sad eyes who had shared their table and slept in his bed and taught his son how to build the perfect blanket fort. The note remained in his wallet, creased from handling, a reminder of a brief time when kindness had felt like the most natural thing in the world. Thursday at 2 p.m. found Marcus sitting in a downtown law office that cost more per square foot than he made in a month. The waiting room alone intimidated him, with its polished marble floors, original artwork, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. He'd worn his best shirt, the navy blue one he saved for parent-teacher conferences and job interviews, but still felt completely out of place. Catherine Brennan turned out to be a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from years of handling other people's money. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine but professional, and Marcus could tell immediately that she was someone who didn't waste time on small talk. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming," she said, leading him into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city skyline. "Please, have a seat. Can I get you coffee? Water?" Marcus accepted the coffee, mainly because his hands needed something to do. The conference table was large enough to seat 12 people, and he wondered briefly why they needed so much space for what he assumed would be a simple conversation about mistaken identity. "Now then," Catherine said, settling across from him with a thick manila folder. "You mentioned on the phone that you know Lily. What you don't know is that Lily's full name is Lily Westbrook, and she's the daughter of Robert Westbrook." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Robert Westbrook. Even someone who didn't follow business news knew that name. Tech billionaire, real estate mogul, one of the richest men in the country. His face was on magazine covers, his opinions quoted in newspapers, his business decisions capable of affecting entire industries. "That's impossible," Marcus said automatically. Lily was just ... She was a kid who needed help. She couldn't be ... double quotes the daughter of a billionaire. Catherine finished. "I assure you, she is. And according to her, you saved her life that night." Catherine opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. It was a professional headshot, the kind used for corporate websites and annual reports. But Marcus recognized those eyes immediately. Lily, but older, more polished, wearing the kind of clothes that cost more than his monthly rent. "She's been fighting her father in court for 6 months, Catherine continued, trying to establish a trust fund in your name. The amount she specified is $2.5 million. Marcus's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down with trembling hands. $2.5 million. That's not possible. I gave her soup and a place to sleep for 3 days. People don't give away millions of dollars for soup." "Lily does," Catherine said simply. "She's 18 now, which means she has access to her trust fund from her grandmother. The first thing she did was attempt to set up this gift for you and your son. Her father, however, is fighting it every step of the way." Catherine pulled out another document, this one thick with legal language that Marcus couldn't begin to understand. "Robert Westbrook has filed multiple motions claiming that you manipulated his daughter during a vulnerable time, that you somehow coerced her into this decision. He's hired a team of investigators to look into your background, your finances, your relationship with Lily." The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. Marcus loosened his tie, trying to process what he was hearing. "He thinks I planned this. That I somehow knew who she was and ... groomed her for financial gain. Yes. That's the language he's using in court. Catherine's expression hardened. It's a common tactic among wealthy families when they want to discredit someone they consider beneath their social status. Paint the other party as a predator, a manipulator, someone who couldn't possibly deserve their generosity. Marcus stood up, pacing to the window, looking out at a city that suddenly seemed foreign to him. So what does this mean? She can't give us the money because her father doesn't approve. Actually, she can. Lily is legally an adult, and the money is hers to distribute as she sees fit. But her father has significant resources, and he's using them to make this as difficult as possible for everyone involved. Catherine pulled out what looked like a tablet and set it on the table. Before we go any further, there's something you need to see. Lily recorded these videos as part of her legal testimony. She wanted to make sure her father couldn't twist the narrative of what happened between you. The screen showed Lily sitting in what looked like a law office, but her appearance was startling. She was thinner than Marcus remembered, her face drawn with exhaustion, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. But when she began to speak, her voice was steady, determined. My name is Lily Westbrook, and I want to state clearly and for the record that Marcus Johnson saved my life on the night of February 15th, not just from the storm, but from something much worse. Marcus sank back into his chair, transfixed by the image of the girl he'd worried about for months. I had run away from home after my father told me that I was a disappointment, that I would never amount to anything, that I was worthless unless I could generate value for the family business. I was planning to, double quotes. She paused, gathering herself. I was planning to end my life that night. I was sitting in that blizzard hoping I would just disappear. Marcus felt his breath catch. The thin clothes, the exhaustion, the way she'd seemed. So grateful for the smallest kindnesses. Marcus Johnson found me and brought me into his home without asking for anything in return. He gave me his bed, shared his food, bought me clothes with money I now know he needed for his own family. But more than that, he showed me what unconditional love looks like. He and Devin treated me like family, not because of who my father is or what I could do for them, but because I was a human being who needed help. The video continued for another 10 minutes, with Lily describing in detail every act of kindness, every moment of genuine care, every instance where Marcus had chosen to give rather than take. By the end, Marcus was struggling to maintain his composure. She's been living independently since she turned 18, Catherine explained, stopping the video. Her relationship with her father has been completely inheritance to establish this trust because, in her words, you're the only real father she's ever known. Marcus stared at the now blank screen, thinking about the quiet girl who had folded their sheets so carefully, who had marveled at the simple act of doing dishes, who had laughed with Devin like she'd never experienced joy before. What happens now? He asked. Catherine smiled, the first truly warm expression he'd seen from her. Now, Mr. Johnson, we prepare for a fight. Because Robert Westbrook has no intention of letting a black mechanic from the South Side walk away with what he considers his family's money. And unfortunately for him, he's picked a fight with the wrong people. Marcus thought about Devin, about the bills on his kitchen counter, about the future that had always seemed so uncertain. Then he thought about Lily, alone and fighting her own father in court, determined to honor a debt that existed only in her grateful heart. What do I need to do? The harassment began within a week of Marcus's meeting with Catherine Brennan. It started subtly, the way powerful people always begin their campaigns of destruction, with small inconveniences that could be dismissed as coincidence if you didn't know better. First, it was the man in the expensive suit who showed up at Henderson's auto repair, asking Marcus's boss detailed questions about his employee's character, his relationships with customers, whether he'd ever displayed inappropriate behavior. Then came the credit check inquiries that appeared on Marcus's report. dozens of them from companies he'd never heard of, all happening within a few days of each other. "Dad, there's a guy sitting in a car outside our building," Devin said one evening, peering through their apartment window. "He's been there for like 3 hours, just watching." Marcus joined his son at the window, recognizing the telltale signs of professional surveillance. The man wasn't trying to hide. He wanted to be seen, wanted Marcus to know he was being watched. It was intimidation, pure and simple, designed to make him feel exposed and vulnerable. "Don't worry about it," Marcus told Devin, though his own stomach was churning with anxiety. Some people have too much time on their hands, but the pressure continued to build. Marcus's landlord received an anonymous call, reporting suspicious activity in his apartment. His bank account was flagged for unusual activity, freezing his access to his own money for 3 days while they conducted an investigation. His car insurance premium was suddenly increased after what the company called a routine review of his file. The breaking point came when the story hit social media. Someone, using sophisticated digital marketing techniques, had crafted a narrative that painted Marcus as a predator who had specifically targeted a vulnerable wealthy girl. The posts were professionally written, accompanied by photos of him walking to work, of Devin at school, of their modest apartment building. Everything was framed to make their poverty look sinister, their kindness appear calculated. Local mechanic, accused of manipulating billionaire's daughter for money. Read one headline that had somehow found its way onto dozens of local news websites simultaneously. The article was carefully worded to avoid direct accusations that could result in libel charges. But the implication was clear. Marcus Johnson was a gold digger who had exploited a troubled teenager for financial gain. The comments section was brutal. People who had never met Marcus, who knew nothing about his character or his life, felt qualified to judge his motives and predict his guilt. Some of the language was explicitly racist, calling him predictable slurs and making assumptions about his character based solely on his appearance and economic status. Devin discovered the story when classmates began sharing the links. There, teenage cruelty amplified by the anonymity of social media. He came home from school with red eyes and clenched fists, throwing his backpack across the room with more force than Marcus had ever seen from his usually controlled son. "They're saying you're a criminal," Devin said, his voice cracking with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "Kids at school are asking me if we're going to be rich now, if that's why you helped her. They're saying you planned the whole thing." Marcus sat on the couch beside his son, choosing his words carefully. "Devin, look at me. You know who I am. You know what kind of man I am. Does any of this sound like something I would do?" "Of course not," Devin said quickly. "But Dad, they have pictures of our building, of you walking to work. How do they even know where we live?" Marcus had been wondering the same thing. The surveillance was clearly professional, expensive, and thorough. Someone with significant resources with funding this campaign of harassment, and they weren't concerned about legal boundaries or ethical considerations. Catherine Brennan called that evening with an update that confirmed Marcus's worst fears. Robert Westbrook has hired Blackstone Investigations, one of the most aggressive private investigation firms in the country. They specialize in what they call reputation management, but what everyone else calls character assassination. "How is this legal?" Marcus asked, pacing his small kitchen while Devin did homework at the table, trying to pretend he wasn't listening to every word. "Most of it isn't," Catherine replied, "but proving it in court takes time, and Westbrook knows that. He's betting that the pressure will force you to withdraw your claim to the trust fund before we can get an injunction." The harassment escalated throughout the following weeks. Marcus's supervisor at Henderson's Auto Repair pulled him aside for an uncomfortable conversation about the negative attention the shop was receiving. Customers were canceling appointments, claiming they didn't feel comfortable having their cars serviced by someone under investigation. "I'm not saying I believe any of it," his supervisor said, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation, "but I've got a business to run, Marcus. I can't afford to lose customers over this. Marcus understood the unspoken message. Keep his head down, stay quiet, or find somewhere else to work. It was the same message he'd received his entire life, whenever he'd dared to occupy space that made powerful people uncomfortable. The attacks on social media became more coordinated, more vicious. Someone had clearly hired a team of people to flood comment sections with accusations and speculation. They dug up every public record they could find, from Marcus's high school graduation photo to his divorce papers, turning his entire life into evidence of his supposed predatory nature. But what hurt most was watching. Devin struggled with the unwanted attention at school. His son, who had always been confident and outgoing, became withdrawn and defensive. His grades began to slip as he spent more energy managing social humiliation than focusing on his studies. Maybe I should just tell them to keep the money, Marcus said during one of his evening calls with Catherine. This isn't worth putting Devin through. That's exactly what Westbrook is counting on, Catherine replied firmly. He's systematically destroying your reputation because he believes that men like you will eventually fold under pressure. He's betting that you don't have the resources or the will to fight back. Marcus looked across the room at Devin, who was trying to concentrate on algebra while ignoring the constant buzz of notifications on his phone, most of them from classmates sharing the latest cruel meme or speculative article about their family. What kind of man does this to a kid? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Robert Westbrook was the kind of man who viewed other people as obstacles to be removed, problems to be solved, inconveniences to be eliminated. He wasn't seeing Devin as a 15-year-old boy trying to navigate high school. He was seeing him as collateral damage in a war he intended to win. But as Marcus watched his son handle the harassment with a dignity that made him proud, he realized something important. Robert Westbrook had made a fundamental miscalculation. He assumed that because Marcus was poor, he was also weak. He assumed that because Marcus came from nothing, he would be willing to accept nothing. He was about to learn otherwise. Catherine, Marcus said, his voice steady and determined, what do we need to do to fight back? The silence on the other end of the line was brief, but significant. When Catherine spoke again, there was something new in her voice, a respect that hadn't been there before. Now you're asking the right question, Mr. Johnson, and I think it's time Robert Westbrook learned that he's picked a fight with the wrong family. The courtroom was smaller than Marcus had expected, more like a conference room than the dramatic legal theaters he'd seen in movies. Judge Patricia Chen presided from behind a modest wooden bench, her demeanor professional, but warm as she reviewed the documents before her. This was family court, not criminal court, but the stakes felt just as high as Marcus sat beside Catherine, watching the door for Lily's arrival. When she entered, Marcus almost didn't recognize her, the 18-year-old woman who walked confidently to the witness stand bore little resemblance to the frightened girl he'd found in the snow 15 months earlier. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a navy blue dress that was elegant but not expensive. Everything about her appearance seemed calculated to project independence, maturity, and quiet strength. But when her eyes met Marcus's across the courtroom, he saw the same gratitude and affection that had been there the morning she'd hugged him goodbye. Robert Westbrook sat at the opposing table with his team of 3 attorneys, his expression a mask of cold disapproval. He was exactly what Marcus had expected from his magazine photos, silk-haired, impeccably dressed, carrying himself with the casual arrogance of someone who had never been told no. When he looked at his daughter, there was no warmth, no paternal concern, just the calculating gaze of a man evaluating a business problem. Ms. Westbrook, Judge Chen began after Lily had been sworn in. You've requested to testify on behalf of Mr. Johnson's petition. Please tell the court, in your own words, about your relationship with the defendant. Lily's voice was steady as she began, but Marcus could see her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the witness stand. Your Honor, Marcus Johnson saved my life on the night of February 15th of last year, not just from the storm, but from a decision I was planning to make that would have ended everything. A murmur went through the courtroom. Robert Westbrook's lead attorney, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit, made a note on his legal pad. Can you elaborate on that statement? Judge Chen asked gently. Lily took a deep breath, her gaze moving briefly to her father before returning to the judge. I had run away from home that night after my father told me that I was a failure, that I would never amount to anything, that the only value I had was as a potential asset to his business empire. I was 17 years old, and I was planning to end my life rather than continue living as a disappointment to the only parent I had left. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He'd suspected that Lily had been in crisis that night, but hearing her say it so plainly made him realize how close they'd come to tragedy. I was sitting outside Mr. Johnson's apartment building in a blizzard, hoping that I would just freeze to death. Lily continued, her voice growing stronger. I had given up, but Marcus found me, and instead of calling the police or walking away, he brought me into his home and treated me like a human being who mattered. Objection, Robert Westbrook's attorney interrupted. The witness is providing dramatic testimony that's irrelevant to the question of whether Mr. Johnson manipulated her for financial gain. Judge Chen considered this for a moment. Overruled. The witness's state of mind and the circumstances of their meeting are directly relevant to her. Motivation for establishing the trust fund. Please continue, Ms. Westbrook. Lily nodded, seeming to draw strength from the judge's support. Marcus didn't know who I was. He didn't know my last name, didn't know my family had money, didn't ask intrusive questions about why I was on the street. He just saw someone who needed help, and he helped. She turned slightly in her chair, addressing Marcus directly for the first time. He gave me his bed and slept on the couch. He shared his food, even though I could tell they didn't have much. He bought me warm clothes with money that I now know was meant for his son's school supplies. Marcus remembered that day at the thrift store, the way Lily had clutched that second-hand sweater like it was precious. He'd wondered at the time why someone from her background would be so moved by such a simple gift. But the most important thing, Lily continued, turning back to the judge, was that he showed me what a real family looks like. He and Devin included me in their daily routines, their inside jokes, their quiet moments together. Marcus would check on me before bed, the same way he checked on Devin. He would ask about my day, help me with homework I pretended to have because I just wanted someone. Attacks on his reputation, employment, and personal safety represents a troubling abuse of resources and privilege. Robert Westbrook's lead attorney started to rise, but the judge's stern look silenced him before he could speak. While this court lacks jurisdiction to address those actions directly, I am recommending that the district attorney's office review the evidence for possible charges related to stalking, harassment, and intentional interference with employment. Wealth does not grant immunity from the law, Mr. Westbrook. The transformation in Marcus's life began immediately, but not in the way he'd expected. The first thing he did was sit down with Devin and Catherine to create a plan that honored the gift Lily had given them, while ensuring they remained the same people who had earned her gratitude in the first place. This money doesn't change who we are, Marcus told his son, over breakfast, in their same small kitchen. It just gives us the chance to become the best versions of ourselves. They paid off their debts first, a surprisingly modest amount that eliminated the constant stress that had shadowed their lives for years. Devin's college fund was fully established, ensuring that his academic future would never depend on Marcus's ability to work double shifts. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus used a portion of the trust to open Johnson Family Auto Repair, a small shop that specialized in honest work at fair prices for working families who couldn't afford the premium garages in wealthier neighborhoods. The shop became more than just a business. It became a community hub. Marcus hired 2 other mechanics, both single fathers who understood the struggle of balancing work and parenting. He established a sliding fee scale for customers facing financial hardship and created a small emergency fund to help families dealing with unexpected car troubles they couldn't afford. But the most meaningful change came in the form of regular Sunday dinners at Marcus's new house, a modest 3-bedroom place in a safe neighborhood where Devin could walk to school and Lily could have her own room when she visited, because Lily did visit regularly and with the joy of someone who had finally found where she belonged. She'd moved to Chicago for college, studying social work with the intention of helping other young people who felt trapped by their circumstances. Every Sunday, she would arrive with groceries and stories from her week, settling into the rhythm of family life that had first saved her and now sustained them all. "Dad," she said one evening, the word coming as naturally as breathing. "Devin's teacher called about the science fair. He's going to need help with his project on renewable energy." Marcus looked up from the engine manual he'd been reading, struck as always by how seamlessly Lily had integrated into their family. She called him Dad now, not because she'd forgotten Robert Westbrook, but because she understood the difference between a biological parent and a real father. Robert Westbrook himself had become a cautionary tale in business circles, his reputation permanently tarnished by the public revelation of his treatment of his daughter. The recordings of his harassment campaign had been leaked to the media, showing a pattern of vindictive behavior that made investors nervous and board members uncomfortable. His empire hadn't collapsed, but his standing in society had been irreparably damaged. More importantly, he'd lost the one thing that Marcus knew mattered most, his daughter's love and respect. 6 months after the court ruling, Marcus stood in his auto shop at closing time, watching Devin help one of the mechanics finish up a brake job while Lily organized the appointment book with the efficiency of someone who understood the value of honest work. The evening sun streamed through the windows, casting everything in golden light. His phone buzzed with a text from a local newspaper reporter asking for an interview about his rags to riches story, but Marcus deleted it without responding. This wasn't about riches, and it never had been. It was about the simple truth that kindness, when offered without expectation of return, had the power to transform lives in ways that money alone never could. That night, after Devin had finished his homework and Lily had driven back to her dorm, Marcus sat on his front porch, looking up at the stars barely visible through the city's glow. He thought about that blizzard night 15 months ago, about the choice he'd made to open his door to a stranger in need. He'd learned something profound about the mathematics of kindness. It multiplied in ways that defied logic. One night of simple human decency had saved Lily's life, secured Devin's future, and created a family bound by choice rather than blood. It had turned a struggling mechanic into a small business owner and a frightened teenager into a confident woman with purpose. Most importantly, it had proven that the most valuable inheritance anyone could leave wasn't money or property or status. It was the example of how to treat other human beings with dignity, compassion, and love. Marcus smiled, thinking about tomorrow's schedule. There would be cars to fix, customers to help, and another Sunday dinner to plan. Lily would probably arrive early to help with cooking, and Devin would complain about his chemistry homework until one of them offered to help. It was, Marcus reflected, exactly the kind of rich life that no amount of money could buy, but that a single act of kindness had made possible. Some